Sat Sri Akal, everyone. Welcome back to the Crypto Khalsa. And today with us is Amar. He's the founder, the CEO of a great protocol called Tashi. Tashi is basically a, a very innovative platform that I've found. It's basically into peer to peer, multiple players gaming, and which utilizes a proprietary consensus engine. Um, so, Amar, thank you for coming to the Crypto Khalsa, taking out your valuable time. How are you doing?
Sat Sri Akal, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure and honor to be here, absolutely. And it's a auspicious day start to the new year, so exciting times ahead for everyone.
Absolutely. So, Amar, let's start. Could you start by telling us a bit about your background and what inspired you to enter the world of Web3?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got into Web3 in about 2021, but I've been working for a fair period of time before this. So I started my career in finance, doing investment banking, consulting, all that kind of stuff. My first gig was with KPMG. And then post that, I got into Web2 investments with this Malaysian fund, ended up doing a few acquisitions in Singapore and moving here and then helping them expand across Southeast Asia. So helping them set up startups across Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, China. So scaling things, that's when I kind of got more into building stuff. Then I decided to work with some slightly larger companies. So I helped Uber set up driver operations in the region, set up Grab's B2B sales and partnerships in the region, and kind of learned that for a while. And then I think realized that it was time to venture out on my own. So in 2020, left and started my own startup, which was a freelancer marketplace. That's when I got into Web3. Did my own crypto, like an NFT project, which was actually called MetaSeek. So we actually minted over 2,000 NFTs. They're live on OpenSea. You can go check them out. They're all NFTs of Sikhs wearing different kind of the stars. So it's quite cool. And that's when I spent some time. So I got into it because it was the cool thing. My friends were talking about it and it seemed interesting, right? But that's when I went deep into understanding the technology, converted my startup into a freelancer marketplace for Web3. And really understood the future of it because I think one of the challenges in this space is always that there's a lot of noise, right? So what you see is that from the outsider's perspective, even today, someone like my dad will come up to me and be like, "Yeah, what is this Bitcoin? It can go to zero, right?" So, and then you have to kind of really explain things to, and that's kind of the most base level of questions that in within the space, we don't think about it in those terms, but someone out on the outside is still thinking about life in that way, right? So I asked myself those questions as well, right? Like, what makes this place exciting for the people who've been building in this space for 10 years, right? Like, why are they still here? What's the exciting part, right? So money is obviously one aspect of things, but wake up and to build new things, you need to have like a vision and a mission and something that really drives you, that you're really bringing improvement into this world, right? So once I started understanding what was driving things, what the underlying value of the technology was, I got really excited, right? So by then I'd known some of my co-founders for a while, who'd been building and investing in this space for significantly longer period. And kind of like slightly the market was cooling off, and I was kind of thinking about, and people weren't looking at like that many freelancers. So I was thinking of what's the next big thing to build. So that's when I started chatting with my current co-founders, and they came in with different lenses. One of them is a well-renowned finance professional in Singapore, like has worn many hats from building Morgan Stanley's business in Asia to setting up his own Web2 fund to a whole number of other things. And our CTO, was a founding member at one of the leading protocols, Hedera Hashgraph. So, people who have been a lot more seasoned in this space, um, and they kind of brought me on board to, build from the ground up, and we, spent some time ideating and figuring and starting to build. So that's kind of how I got into building Tashi as it is.
Hmm, that is awesome, Amar. Could you provide a brief history of Tashi and what inspired you to create the platform?
Absolutely. So I think I shared like some parts of this, and how we came together. For all of us, I think one of the common themes was that today, if we look at decentralization, everybody thinks of public blockchains, right? But if you think about decentralization, everything doesn't need to be on a public blockchain, right? So if you get centralized ledger technology, you can have things that are offline as well and still get the benefits of decentralization. So we were kind of, big believers in the gaming industry and felt like there was a lot of value that could be added in that industry outside of what you see that what we today Web3 gaming, right? So the primary driver of Web3 gaming is the financialization of things, right? Which is you have assets on chain. But we felt there was a lot more value propositions that could be brought into the gaming industry by applying this technology. So that was kind of the core uh, underlying basis that we all came together on. And we started building to figure out what that could be, right? So it was decentralized in gaming without necessarily having things in the public blockchain space. So what I kind of really felt was that, if you look at multiplayer gaming, which is what majority of games are moving towards as games are becoming way more social, right? So it used to be build multiplayer games and, only 5 to 10% games for multiplayer. But today, like about 20 to 30% games are already multiplayer, and that trend is increasing. And one of the challenges in multiplayer gaming is that server costs are highly prohibitive, right? So that's why I see like the larger studios building these games because it's the server costs add up really fast as soon as your games scale, right? And that's why you see companies like Amazon, which has AWS, has utilization rate of 30% and a margin 70%, right? So when you think about like, so how much of those servers are being utilized, but still the margins are so high. And they're charging so much for convenience, right? So we kind of realized that, listen, what if you need servers, right? Because the hardware device players are playing games today, you those are powerful enough to run games. So you don't really need servers. One of the other big things that servers really help in the whole architecture is they awareness, right? So they help with anti-cheat, right? So we were like, the hardware is already ready from a performance standpoint. How can we add some elements in there to ensure anti-cheat? And so that's where Tashi Protocol comes in as a blockchain layer on top of games that ensure that people can't cheat, right? So that was kind of the underlying kind of thing that we went out to solve, right? So we kind of went through the journey of step by step figuring out, testing the problem statement, solving it for a bunch of games.
So, how does the platform integrate or support competitive gaming or esports events?
So we aren't right now targeting esports directly. So we actually have a few partners that offer esports, and they use different parts of our tech stack to support it. Right. So for us, it's not about if the game is played offline or if it's played within or it's like a competitive esport. It's about the underlying architecture. Right. So if you are playing game, you don't think about is this running on AWS or GCP or is it a local thing or is it a LAN party? Like the players aren't thinking that, right? So for us, it's what we are doing is we're replacing your cloud servers. That's kind of the most underlying part. So it's very different than what other blockchains are offering in this space right now. So the value for esports for us is that if you're having an esports tournament, so this is getting slightly technical here, but I want to answer this at the right now itself. Is so what happens is if you were having, say, for example, an esports tournament in a place like Philippines, right? Uh, and the players are playing with each other, say a game like a World of Warcraft, right? Now, World of Warcraft actually runs on what you call the client server technology, which is what I was kind of talking about earlier. So those pairs would need to be pinging a data center, which is far, right? So they're not playing with each other locally. They're actually playing with each other having to connect with a data center typically. So what we do is that we allow peer-to-peer gaming to happen locally. So you don't need a data center at all. So it actually makes the gameplay much more smoother. So it depends. And this is a case-to-case scenario, right? So if you're in Singapore where your data center is also in Singapore, then the advantage is a lot less in terms of gameplay. It's more server cost perspective, which within one game day of esports is not as much. But so yeah, so depending on the case to case, there's advantages on different scenarios.
Okay. So, what role does Deepin really play in enhancing user experiences within the Tashi ecosystem?
So great question. I think you're kind of thinking about what I would probably add on in the next step, right? So let's go back to the Philippines example that I was talking about. If you look at game services, right? So um, for the average person who would be watching who doesn't understand things from a technical perspective, so what seems very simple when you're playing a game, right? So for example, World of Warcraft, there's a lot of things happening in the back end which are very complicated, right? So just put it very simply, like you're getting services of AWS servers in the back end, but it's not as simple as that, right? There's a number of services that AWS has built over a period of time that the is actually looking for. So one of is, for example, a lobby, right, which basically is the place that two players join to connect with each other. Have a service called matchmaking, which is like who are the best players to put into a game together, depending on their skills and so on, right? There's something called relay, which means two players aren't able to connect with each other online. So a relay has something called open mats that enables that connectivity. So there's a whole bunch of things other than just the live ops of the game, of the connecting the client server model. So what the Deepin ecosystem is actually doing is it's enabling all of these services to happen without having a centralized server run by the likes of any of the hyperscalers, right? So your gameplay gets better because you're playing peer to peer, but you still need some of these services, and the Deepin network can offer these services to you. So your matchmaking can then also happen locally by a Deepin node that's also in the Philippines. So you don't need data centers anymore. You can spin up nodes all around the world, offer these services that make your decentralized ecosystem scale a lot more seamlessly.
That is a great answer, Amar. Thank you for that. Um, while going through your documentation, I found a concept called Forge, which is fully on DAG game. Um, can you explain how this innovation enhances gaming experience compared to the traditional blockchain-based solutions?
Absolutely. So I think you picked all the super technical questions. So hopefully the audience is kind of well versed with the space. I'll try and give the most simplistic answer for this one. So uh, if you look at the father of blockchain is essentially a distributed ledger technology, right? What means is that instead of saving ledgers in single place, they are distributed, right? Now there's underlying technologies that enable this to work, right? So blockchain is one. So what happens in the blockchain space is that assume you have 1,000 people that are participating in it. Then all of those people elect a leader that mines the next block, and then they keep the trace of the history, right? So that's how a blockchain. A DAG is a different mechanism altogether. So DAG stands for Directed Acyclical Graph. And so those have a different kind of consensus mechanism. For us, we use called ABFT. So that is asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance, which is separate part of it. But the way the DAG works is that if you have, in this case, 1,000 people, then two-thirds of the people are constantly voting to agree the state of that DAG for it to move forward, right? So if less than two-thirds of the people approve something, that means the state is not been approved. So that means you have two-thirds of actors to be correct, right? So in blockchain, it's only 50%. In DAG, it's 2/3. Now, how a DAG works is that, especially our DAG, and there's a few popular ones, Hedera Hashgraph being one of them. That's where we got some of our inspiration from as well. Is it's a gossip protocol. So what that means is that all the people that are participating in this, they're sending small packets of data to each other about what they hear from everybody else. So information shared is not just the information about you. So, for example, if there's, to make the numbers simple, if there's 10 of us participating in consensus, right? I am not just sharing information about Amar. I am sharing information about Amar plus the information I received from the 9 other people. So then, when Reed receives the information, he's not just heard about me, he's heard about what Amar heard about everybody else. So that's called gossip about gossip. So one person, so when you're hearing information from of all different people, and one person's information doesn't tally up, right? Now, say, imagine there is another person in this chat who we'll call, say, Crypto Aman, right? So because I know he has a popular channel list. So he sends something different than what you heard about from me. You can, like, hey, I'm hearing from 9 people this information about Aman, but it's different from him. That means he's doing different. But as long as everybody's sharing the same piece of information, the consensus continues. As long as that information is over 2/3, consensus still continues. The moment it becomes less than 2/3, consensus stops. So, kind of in a place like gaming, even if you go in the competitive space, the idea is that 2/3 of people are good actors, and less than 1/3 will be potentially bad actors. But if that's the case, doesn't stop the game. The game continues. Their state gets reset to 0 in case they do something malicious.
Hmm. That is that is a great answer, Amar. The reason I was really excited to read about this protocol is I recently interviewed Michael, who is one of the core developers of Caspa, and Caspa uses DAG in a very similar way. And he is one of the proprietary, uh, you can say, he's one of the proprietary speakers about DAG, and it's really one of the greatest technologies into blockchain, and it improves the consensus time as well. And let's talk more about the one other interesting thing that I read is that the Tashi protocol also moves the consensus engine into the player's game session directly. Can you tell me how does this really improve scalability, speed, and the overall gameplay performance?
Absolutely. So I think the before kind of answering that, the core part of our innovation was that our team comes as specialists in the coding language Rust. So when we kind of wrote this algorithm, we did it in the Rust language that got us a lot of benefit, right? So the bits were we can tune this for speed or tune this for latency. For gaming, latency matters a lot more, right? So when we tune it for latency, we managed to bring our latency down to 30 milliseconds, which you can run all kinds of live ops on games on. So when you look at other blockchains per se, even the fastest ones are operating at 300 to 500 milliseconds, right? So you can't run a decentralized game. So people building in the fully on-chain gaming space have had tons of challenges because the blockchains are just not fast enough. Versus our Panic, we managed to make it super fast. So when tuned for latency, that they're able to actually run live ops while having consensus running in parallel.
Hmm. Okay. So I think speed is the winner here.
Absolutely. Because if you think about gaming, right, even if you're not talking about professional gaming, people care the most about gameplay. And the gameplay means there can't be any lag. And depending on whatever your game is, say in FPS, 60 milliseconds is fine. For other games, 100 milliseconds is fine. So as long as we're under that, it's okay. The game works smoothly. So at the moment you cross that threshold, right? So the moment you cross 100 milliseconds, your gameplay actually gets impacted. Then you can only have turn-based games, and that's why you see all the crypto games today are all mostly turn-based games. Because when you're playing any kind of even an arcade game or a MOBA, all of those games still need a fast consensus to happen within the game for the game to move forward.
Correct. Let's talk more about the seamless user-friendly experience that Tashi protocol obviously works on, especially for gamers who are very new to Web3 or blockchain technologies. How does Tashi ensure that their game can be integrated into a platform which is totally decentralized? How can a normal game, a normal multiplayer game, can contact you guys and you can help them to get everything on board?
So there's two parts to when you kind of think about this, right? Our core business right now is a B2B business. So we are right now selling just to games. And so our sales cycle is with games. So, we are not interacting directly with players. So our internal metric is to make sure the gameplay is smooth, but we're not directly speaking to players in a way right now, right? So we're building the deep-in network where that will become a bit more B2C, and those same players can become part of our network and join and run the nodes and so on. But that's something that is yet to come. So right now, the core business is the B2B one. So we have obviously like inbounds on our website. You can go sign up right now as a game developer. It's a pretty seamless process. The moment you sign up, you get access to a whole lot of material in terms of how do you use Tashi, there's tutorials, etc., including calendar links to say speak to me, speak to our project manager, so on, so we can guide them, right? So I think because what we're doing is fairly different than what's happening in the ecosystem, we spend a lot of time actually doing education and outreach, right? So and when I say outreach, not meaning sales outreach, because I think we've done a bit of that, but more in terms of creating awareness of a new way of thinking about things, right? Because if you look at blockchain, that's the more prevalent way of how people think about decentralization. DAGs are still small and relatively new in comparison. So even though it's a lot more beneficial for games to use this kind of technology, they are still thinking about blockchain first. That's because that's what they've heard of, that's what they read about. There's a lot more content about it. So our primary job then becomes, how do you educate the audience and make them understand that these value propositions exist because of this technology, and to think about things differently. So a lot of times, not just with game studios, even with investors, kind of pull them investors who've been in this space for years, have to pull them out of their blockchain thinking and say, like, listen, don't add meaning to the words I'm saying without letting me finish for a few minutes, right? Because they automatically think of Web3 gaming, think about all the other chains, and how do you differentiate from Polygon and so on. So you have to start uh, you know with a little bit of a clean slate, which is always harder when people have something to associate certain words with. So that's kind of what we do a lot about in terms of our outreach and explaining to the games and making them understand the value of what we build.
Let's talk about scalability and how do you make sure that as your user base grows, how do you make sure that the platform remains scalable, secure, and easy to use?
So this is one of the advantages of DAGs, right? So if you kind of think about it, um, when you're running a blockchain, you're kind of, all within one network versus DAG. To the previous point, I think you were saying that we put, we're bringing things to the edge, right? So what that means that, say, if there's 10 people playing a game right now, right? So there is a Tashi session that's spinning up in that very minute. And each of those players is running a Tashi node, right? So that's it's on the edge because automatically a game that has Tashi running underlying the infrastructure, then the players are running those nodes automatically. Now, what's the interesting part is that one session is just within when the game starts, and as soon as the game ends, that session ends. right? So at that point in time, you can think there is Tashi. So now, if there is a game that has a million sessions running in parallel, one session doesn't impact the other at all. So that's why this brilliantly scalable. We are kind of offering is to 1,000 games, and each of those 1,000 games have 100,000 sessions running in parallel. None of those overlap. Those are all individual sessions using this technology individually. So where the scalability now comes in is when you have over, say, 100 people within one session. That's when you start a little bit of impact on latency. So we have a few novel ways of fixing that as well. But right now, for all the games that we work with, we don't really see that use case coming in where one game has over 100 players within one session. So we've kind of not gone out to solve that problem yet. We're aware of it. We kind of have ways of solving it by creating partitions within the session. But at this point of time, it's not a core focus because that need just doesn't arise.
So in a session, how many users can really push in, and how many users can have a seamless experience as of now with the current consensus algorithm?
So typically, we've seen like our sweet spot is like up to 48 players without like any impact happening. Over that, you start seeing a little bit. But if you see majority of the games in the multiplayer environment, like barely any for more than 48 players. So the that we're solving for now is actually having posting peer-to-peer metaverse spaces. So that see like a larger number of players, and that's what we'll be solving this for. Because one of the inherent challenges in the metaverse is sustainability. Because that's where you see tons of server costs adding up. So we've kind of built our own peer-to-peer metaverse to showcase like this can work. That you don't need server in the middle, and then we'll create partitions within those so that you can have hundreds of people live at the same time.
Hmm. Let's talk about Tashi's community management and community engagement. How do you make sure that you create a positive user environment, and if there is any surprising or insightful piece of feedback that you received from your community that you would like to share?
So I think for us, it's actually not been supremely challenging, at least so far. That's because we primarily been a B2B business, right? So for us, a lot of the stuff we do is to scale our ecosystem, scale our partnerships, scale our customers, and so on, right? So for us, I think the biggest thing that I think or the learning has been that, um, you know, how do we create or echo the content created by our partners, because inherently showcasing our technology to a customer is very hard, right? So for us, basically showcasing the games that use Tashi became something that we had to learn over a period of time, because for the longest period we were talking about how Tashi's technology is great, but as the user, like Hardeep is not using Tashi, he's playing the game, right? So that was I think our biggest learning. And that's what people would always come in and ask, like, show me like this works, right? Like, how do I use this? Or so I think connecting those dots has been important for us. And that's why we've started now building a lot more front facing stuff. So we built our own Telegram game to showcase how this tech works in that space and a few other things. I think the bigger part or the bigger challenge is something we'll start facing quite soon. So we will be launching a token this year. So, within Q1 is the goal. And I think as we go down that path, that's where, you see community management becoming a bit more of a challenge, because have people who are, constantly asking questions around the tokens and all those things come in at that point of time. So far, I think it's not been more of a challenge. It's been more of an understanding the people that we're serving and making sure that they get to see what we built and how they can actually use it.
Hmm. Let's now talk about some of the challenges that you faced while you're building this network. Some of the things that you would like to share to the world. What was the most difficult thing that you faced while you were building this protocol?
So I think the biggest is what I just shared with you right now. I think now when I talk about it and I think about it, it seems like the most simple thing. And I've been in startups for 15 years, so it's the most obvious thing. But for for a long period, we were talking about our technology, right? Like both investors, with our customers, with our community, we were explaining that we built this cool consensus engine, which is super fast. So if we tune for throughput, our consensus engine can actually do 1 million TPS, right? Which is kind of uh, almost 10x faster than anyone else out there, right? So for the longest time, we were talking about that in all our materials, right? Like in our socials, in our investor pitches, so on. So I think just understanding and learning that most people don't care about technology, right? Like if you think about OpenAI had been around for uh, 7 years before they launched ChatGPT 3, and within the launch of 1 month of launch of that, things blew up. But until then, it was just like this organization that existed, right? Like there were a few people who were interested in that, but like the moment ChatGPT came out, the world changed, right? So that's kind of like biggest thing is that the moment you have a product that people can use seamlessly is when things become seamless for the company. So that's kind of something I think that had been our challenge. And as a B2B company, having a solution for game developers that's seamless for everyone was still a challenge. So that's something that we have been trying to solve and kind of building things that make using Tashi and understanding the value proposition of the tech a lot more easier and a lot more meaningful. So that's kind of been our core focus in the last few months and is for the next few months.
Hmm. Let's talk now about some of the toughest decisions that you've had to take in terms of scaling the platform, whether it is related to technology or partnerships or the team itself, that you would like to share.
So I think one of the big challenges that we've definitely had to take and we've kind of moving in that direction already is that we spent a long time building this consensus engine, right? And I think it's absolutely fantastic. Like all the people, like even uh, you know well-known investors in the world, and I'm talking about tier one folks, when they look at it, they're like, "Wow, this is an amazing piece of technology." But we realized adoption for it was a bit slow. So we kind of moved organically into the whole deepen process where we realized that, we're not maximizing the use of, how much time and money that we spent on building this consensus engine, right? So I think it was probably one of the harder decisions that we've had to make as an entity. It happened organically in a way that we started seeing a lot more demand for the deepen services. But I think just accepting the fact that, you know, the core value of the tech, like is the problems that we're solving aren't best expressed via this deepened network. So, but what we kind of learned and what we built along the way is what this deepened network is solving. So, I think just being able to transition into this new mode has been was definitely a big decision for us, and I think it's kind of set us, in a different course than we thought.
Hmm. And what's been the most rewarding part of your journey so far with Tashi?
Um, I think for me personally, I would say it's been just learning so much, both from people, from the industry, from everything that I do. Like like even though I'd been in tech for a long time, my understanding of technology and my respect for technology has gone like 100, right? So I think just every day is you have to learn something new, right? Because when you're kind of in any other industry which is fast moving, what happens is like the technology still remains similar, right? But in blockchain, like the industry moves so fast that you have to kind of really be in your on top of your feet. So what our launch plans were, say in August, changed in October, and now they're changing again come Jan, right? So every quarter we're making massive strategic changes within a company, which in a startup world you would consider almost suicidal, right? But in it's like critical. Like you have to do it because the market drive what works. It's normal. So I think just being able to constantly stay nimble, learn a lot, learn from people, be able to say, okay, fine, that doesn't work, right? Because to do it at that speed also requires one to be able to say, hey, like, in a way, you're saying like what you thought at that time was wrong, right? So being able to accept that and move fast from that is, both a challenge and equally rewarding.
In a way, I would say blockchain makes you more humble, that you're able to understand that you were not smart enough some time ago, and now the things are better.
Exactly.
So, how do you foresee the future of esports and gaming platforms? How do they evolve over the next, say, 10 years?
So I think I'll take both of those separately because I think esports hasn't, in general, scaled the way people thought it would, right? Like it's got a lot of excitement around it and it's doing fairly okay, but it's not like blown up at the pace people predicted a few years ago, right? So I think when we've heard that from a lot of our gaming partners or a lot of people that we work with are deep in the industry that are even investing and working in esports as well. So I won't comment too much on that space because we're not directly in that space. But that's just a general, I can point of view that we kind of get from the market. Uh, I think we are massively bullish in terms of gaming is going through right now, how it's going to evolve. There's a lot of underlying factors for that. So one is that we've always said this internally that for every person that dies, a gamer is born, right? So anyone that so old isn't necessarily playing a game, but any child that's born today plays games, right? At some point in their life. So this industry by nature is meant to just grow, right? Um, the second big part is that um, with how AI is scaling, building game is becoming a lot more seamless, right? Because if you think about what AI is capable of doing, right, from creating tons of images to writing gaming code, to at some point of time, I'm sure 5 and 10 years, there'll be like AI engines that will rival Unity and Unreal, right? So you'll have physics, etc., all of the simulations being done via some AI engine, right? So the capability that AI is bringing in is that an average person can today, not be a coder and build a game, right? So earlier you be a coder to build a game. Now with that, I think the way this industry starts or the number of games that start coming into the foray will expand like insane, right? So that's why if you think about it, like launching a token 10 years ago was really hard. Like very proper tech geeks had to do it. Today, you go on pump.fun, press 5 buttons, and you launch a token, right? So I think the building of games will become seamless. The financial games will become seamless with how blockchain is moving. So all your assets will be game. Um, all your a lot of the gaming backend will get decentralized. You won't necessarily need servers. Your games will run on players' devices itself. Your distribution will become decentralized. Game ownership will become decentralized. So I think decentralization will become a lot more pervasive. And I think lastly, the biggest part of it will be that I think where the biggest uh, change will really happen is the distribution of gaming, right? So today you think about distribution in a lot more centralized way, but seen content creation becoming decentralized in some way, where everyone's a content creator. Understanding distribution mechanisms that kind of once the game has been built will really be the driver of success, right? So unless you Microsoft spending millions of dollars on distribution, how do you know how to market the game? How do you kind of activate the right channels? How do you know who are the gamers? How do you get it to them without having to spend millions of dollars on your paid ads? That will kind of be, I think, the next evolution. I think that's kind of yet to come when you kind of think about adoption of games.
That's a very insightful and interesting answer, Amar. Thank you for that. Um, as we end this podcast, what advice would you give to traditional gaming studios that are considering to adopt blockchain or Web3 technology in their games?
So I think the number one point I want to say to anybody that's not in Web3 already is separate crypto from Web3, right? So I think the first thing everybody thinks about is there's a lot of volatility in this market. My clients will not be happy with that. It kind of creates this whole potential negative backlash from a public perspective and so on, right? So you take crypto out and just look at the technology, your volatility elements of it are gone, right? And I think I tell people that when you adopt the technology, don't think of tokenizing it, right? Think about uh, even if you use a stable coin in there, think about the advantage of the rails of the technology for the game first, right? People need to understand that majority of people have used a token as a fundraising mechanism, right? So if you're not fundraising, don't necessarily, and there's definitely tons of utilities for tokens in there. So I think there's obviously lots of tokens, but for someone who doesn't understand it, for them understanding the benefits of the underlying technology are the most, prime goal in the first place, right? So helping them understand what the benefits are for their players, what Tashi does, how the value add is there, how the other different blockchains that enable ownership of player, assets, etc., what that does for them. So enabling all of that is the first thing, right? So the moment have that and you can do all of that without having a token in there. So the moment you can understand that, then you enter the world without the risks of volatility. Then after that, you can decide do you need a speculative token or not, right? So that's a different decision altogether. But separating decisions from the speculative part of things and the other value add that blockchain really adds, just going down that path, because I think nobody today that players owning their own data, their own assets is meaningful, right? Having lower cost is meaningful. So these things are not debated anymore. So the way people can understand that you can have all of this without the volatility, that's when things become, I think, a lot more easier for people to move down the path of adoption.
Hmm. On that note, Amar, thank you so much for giving your time. It was a great conversation, man. We're looking forward to some great updates with Tashi. And yeah, would you like to say something, Amar?
No, this has been fantastic. I think a real pleasure to be here, chatting with you, and I think thank you so much for organizing things like this to create awareness in the community. I think it's much needed. I think like when I was answering these questions, I realized that sometimes we're so deep into Web3 that we forget that the average person that we're trying to explain the value of these things to, uh, like us 4 or 5 years ago, right? So. From their lens and answering from their lenses, gives me a new, different perspective on how I look at things again. So it's been a real pleasure as well.
It's great to see founders like you working so hard in this space, and I'm really proud that our community is really growing. And thank you for your time, Amar. And let's stay in touch, and we'll be back soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.